When people ask me what the best pet lizard is, or if you want to start breeding lizards, I always say the top choice would certainly be a leopard gecko. And that's for a lot of different reasons. Not only do they make great pets, so if you want a first-time pet, it's fantastic, but also they have a lot to be desired as far as mutations go, with hundreds of different color palettes. So if you want to be a reptile breeder, even beginner all the way to advanced, leopard geckos might be the best option for you. Leopard geckos were actually described by the zoologist Edward Blyth in 1854, and it's actually technically called a Eublepharus macularis. Now, the Greek word eu means good, and blepher means eyelid. And of course, the Latin term for macularis would be spotted. Now, these guys range all over the more rocky and desert areas into Afghanistan, Pakistan, and even into northwestern India. They're completely ground-dwelling animals. They'll climb a little, but you're not going to find them in the trees, and they're insectivores. We feed them crickets and mealworms, but you can also feed them superworms, cockroaches, and even the occasional waxworm. But it is very important to make sure they get vitamin supplements. I'm going to talk about vitamins and supplements a little bit later, but right now I just want to talk about the ease of setup. Now, this is one of the things that makes leopard geckos so amazingly easy to keep, is whether it's pets or as breeders. And we're going to get into the breeding in a little bit as well. But the fact that they're nocturnal means they don't really need UV light or any kind of a light situation unless you need heat. Now, you want to keep these guys, the hot spot in the back of the cage in this sense, because we keep heat tape, at about 90 to 95 degrees, with the front of the cage being about 80 to 85 degrees. Now, one of the things that's very important is we always put a hide box in that has cocoa fiber in the bottom of it. Now, that's one of the things that's really important with leopard geckos, not only for keeping but also for breeding, is the fact that they need a little bit of a moist hide box. One, it helps them shed, because if they get shed caught on their toes, they can actually lose toes that way. So that helps that one. And number two, when you do breed them, this is the perfect substrate for them to lay their eggs in. Again, more on that later. Other than that, they really don't need a whole lot. We feed them mealworms, and we always keep a dish of mealworms in the cage at all times. That way they can eat whenever they want. And then we'll supplement with crickets maybe once or twice a week. Now, some people will do cockroaches, some people will do superworms, completely fine. But one of the things that's very important is to make sure that you do vitamin and supplement additions to that food, because they just use so much energy in breeding and just living that without those vitamin supplements and calcium supplements, they can develop something that's called metabolic bone disease. You don't want that. Regardless, other than that, just a bowl of water and that's it. Now, if you want to put decorations in, fantastic, that's completely fine. But one of the things that's really great about leopard geckos, if you're getting into breeding, is that they are one of the few lizards, I mean, there's a handful, but one of the few lizards that does really well in a rack system like this. Now, again, if you're keeping it as a pet, you don't have to keep it in a rack system, because you may want to look at the animal. Keep it in a 10-gallon, about a 10-gallon aquarium is fine for an adult. If you have 2 or 3, maybe a 20-gallon aquarium, and you can deck it out all you want. As long as there's a moist hide box, the hot spot's good, the cool spot's good, you're all good to go. But if you want to breed them, you want to keep in a rack system, these lizards thrive in rack systems. Now, when it comes to breeding, again, these are great lizards for beginning breeders. Someone that's never bred anything in reptiles, it's a great way to start with leopard geckos, because they're really quite simple. And there's just a handful of things I'll run through really quickly. First off, you really do want to keep males and females separate during the off season, because males will want to breed, and that can really deplete their energy. Plus, they kind of stress the females out. Now, we keep 4 females in a tub, and then we keep the males separate. Now, they typically breed in the springtime, and it actually gets relatively cool from the areas that they're in. They'll go down into the 50s, believe it or not, Fahrenheit. So, but for us, we actually clean them out for about 3 to 4 weeks without feeding them, just to get all the food out of their system, and then we cool them down to about 60 to 65 degrees for 2 months. That's right, no food, we just keep watering with them and keep checking them. All 4 females stay in there. When we bring them up after 2 months, we immediately start feeding them mealworms, some crickets, beefing them up a little bit, plenty of calcium and vitamin supplements, and then we start putting the males in. Pretty much within about 2 to 3 weeks of that time, you're going to start getting eggs. Now, a gecko will lay 2 eggs every single time that she produces eggs, and she'll produce up to 12 clutches a year. So a female this size could have as many as 24 eggs. That's pretty awesome. So for a beginning breeder, it's a great way to get your feet wet with breeding reptiles. Or if you're an advanced breeder, hey, the thing that's great about leopard geckos, there's a million color phases. So if you want to create that newest, coolest, awesomest, mutation, geckos are still really good even for an advanced keeper. They're cool to work with, they've got a lot of color phases, and hey, entry level, normal, might be $15 or $20, and then a really expensive leopard gecko could sell for $10,000. So again, it has something for everybody. Okay, really quick, back to the vitamin supplement. Now, there's a couple ways of going about this. You can buy VitaBugs, whether they're mealworms, superworms, crickets, and that has all the vitamins that you need, but you're still going to be lacking calcium because VitaBugs doesn't carry calcium. Now, you can feed soldier larvae, and that's fine. That's really high in calcium. You could do that, or you could dust calcium powder on the VitaBugs, and that's 100% fine. Or you can get regular crickets and regular mealworms, and you can do a combination of a dust or a gut load for that matter to make sure that your food is enriched enough so that they get all their vitamins and supplements. What we do is we use something that's called a Vionate, which is a multivitamin that has all kinds of great vitamins in it, and then we use a calcium to mix it in. And basically we just go 3 parts Vionate, which is the multivitamin, to 1 part calcium, and we mix it up and we dust this on all of our crickets and all of our mealworms, and they actually will eat this powder along with eating the actual bug. So we put a little extra powder in it so they can actually lick it up and eat it, and that's going to keep them nice and healthy, and again, keep it away from metabolic bone disease. So anyways, now that we're done with a lot of the boring stuff, guys, and you're thinking, hey, I just want to see some cool lizards, how about we just show you some really cool lizards and talk about genetics a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to do my best not to lose you guys in this genetics mumbo jumbo, but essentially there's really 3 predominant types of genetics when it comes to leopard geckos, and a lot of reptiles for that matter. Anyways, there's recessive traits, there's dominant, codominant, so we're going to keep them the same even though they are a little bit different because dominant doesn't have a super and codominant does. I don't want to confuse you guys any more than I need to. And then lastly, there's polygenic. I'm going to try to cover all 3 of those as we go, but I'm going to start with this animal, which happens to be one of my favorite leopard gecko morphs, and that is a bold bell. Now, the bell is actually a bell albino. There's 3 types of albinos. There's the bell, the TREMPER, and the Vegas. Now, unfortunately, none of them are compatible with one another. So if you have bells, you don't want to breed them to TREMPERs or to Vegas because you'll get all normals. Anyways, back to the bold bell. This also has another gene that is called bold, which is basically that really cool bold stripe right there. Now, that is a polygenic trait. Polygenic just basically means when you have something like striping, you would breed it to a normal animal, and some of the offspring may look a little bit striped, and then you would continue producing from the best striped animals to refine the stripe. So it's not inherent like recessive or codominant or dominant. It is actually line bred. Makes sense? Anyways, the bold bell, an amazing animal. Let's stick with the bell albinos, because to me, the bell albino, it's my favorite. Although I love the TREMPER and the Vegas, I still like the bell. But this guy has an extra gene in it. It's called a white and yellow gene. Now, the white and yellow gene is a dominant gene, which basically just means when you breed a white and yellow to, say, a normal, about half the babies come out white and yellow. So you don't have to breed for heterozygous, and it's not polygenic or line bred. It's actually a dominant trait. So basically what this is a bell albino that's recessive, bred to a white and yellow that just makes things more white and more yellow, and just kind of cool too. It'll change the pattern around a little bit too, just makes them look really beautiful. So the bell albino white and yellows are some of my absolute favorites. Holy cow, this thing is absolutely sick. Now this one is actually what they would call a snow, white and yellow, ENIGMA. Now the snow is actually codominant, which is a little different than dominant because there's a super form that would be called a super snow that I'm going to show you guys in a little bit. And of course we talked about the white and yellow already, but then there's ENIGMA, which is very much like the white and yellow. And up until a year or two ago, people didn't think that you could have a white and yellow ENIGMA because they were very similar mutations, and a lot of people thought that they couldn't cross. Maybe it was a lethal gene or they're the same gene or whatever the case is. Regardless, this is a snow, white and yellow ENIGMA. Another one of my favorites, basically sticking with things that we've already talked about, which is the snow and the bold gene. Again, the snow was the codominant, the bold was the polygenic, so this is a snow bold. Come on, little buddy. This guy's an angry little monkey right there. One of the things I think is really cute about leopard geckos is they'll vocalize. So, you know, a lot of reptiles don't make noises. Little geckos, they'll make little squeaky noises, which is really cute. But regardless, back to cool animals and genetics. This happens to be the snow, which is the MACK snow. It's a TREMPER, which is another albino line, but it's also white and yellow and ECLIPSE. Now, the only thing we haven't talked about yet is the ECLIPSE, which is actually the eye pigmentation. So ECLIPSE gene is something that originated with the jungle, and then it went to a patternless stripe, and then from the patternless stripe ultimately to the ECLIPSE gene. And again, what happens is that, like, this one will have all just, you know, jet red eyes because it's actually a full eclipse. But even just a little eye pigmentation can be an eclipse animal, and it does kind of mess up the pattern a bit too. You can see how this one's really dotty and interesting looking. So the eclipse gene, really cool. When it comes to the genetics of leopard geckos, it's a lot about layering things. We already showed you the snow bold animals. Well, this is what it looks like when you add the TREMPER albino. It just adds a completely different wrinkle to it. And that's what's so cool about leopard geckos, is every time you add a gene, it changes the entire look of the animal. A lot of the mutations you see with leopard geckos happen to be combinations of dominant, codominant, polygenic, recessive. So there's not a tremendous amount of double or even triple recessive mutations. There are some out there, but this was one of the first ones that was out there, and I just really love it. This is the Murphy's patternless, which is a recessive mutation, and an albino. This happens to be a TREMPER albino. So this is a double recessive mutation, which means that you can only produce these on Mendelian genetics 1 in 16 when you're breeding the double heads together. That's why it takes a while with leopard geckos to produce the double recessive or triple recessives, because they're only having 2 eggs. It's not like a reticulated python that has 50 or 60 eggs and you're going to hit your odds 2 or 3 times over. When there's only 2 eggs, it may take you, 8 or 10 or 12 clutches before you'll eventually hit the double recessive. So hopefully by now you guys are starting to get a little bit of the feel behind the genetics of these beautiful leopard geckos. This happens to be a hypo, or really what they would call a super-hypo, because it's really lacking a lot of the melanin. And again, that's a polygenic trait. Which basically happened was that the first hypos were just leopard geckos that were lacking a little bit of the black, and then people bred the least amount of black to the least amount of black, and over generations they became hypo and super hypo. And then this, of course, is a super hypo and a white and yellow that we already talked about. Still one of my all-time favorites, and it's not really that uncommon anymore, would happen to be the super MACK snows. That's right, we showed you the snow stuff. We talked about the fact that it's codominant. Well, when you breed those together, on average, about 1 in 4 babies is going to come out a super form. I just think they're absolutely stunning. And again, once you get a super, now you can breed that to other things. You'll get 100% MACK snows, so you double your odds of producing snows. Now we have the emerines. Now there's a few different lines of, like, the emerines. There's the G project. Basically all of them are just trying to bring out the green color, but they're all a polygenic trait, much like the hypos that we talked about earlier, or the bold animals. What it is you're breeding the most green animal to the most green animal, trying to get really green hues coming out. Now leopard geckos aren't green, but they have green hues, and that adds some interesting enhancement to other mutations. This is a super cool one. This happens to be the MACK Super Snow that I just showed you, but it's added the TREMPER albino and the white and yellow gene together. So that's 4 mutations in one, essentially, because, well, if you consider the super being 2. Anyways, MACK Super Snow, TREMPER, white and yellow. Certainly one of the things that early on in the leopard gecko world was the tangerine dream. Now basically it started with just a little bit of orange in the tail, they called them carrot tails, and then through many generations of polygenically line breeding those animals, you began to get oranger and oranger, or more tangerine animals. This happens to be what they call a blood tangerine line. You know, there's different lines. Regardless, they're absolutely stunning. I just love what the white and yellow gene does to leopard geckos. This happens to just be a MACK snow white and yellow. So that's it. There's a codominant gene and a dominant gene, but take a look at how gorgeous that thing looks. Another eye pigmentation mutation would be the marble eye. Now, Matt Barczyk from Sassenbach Reptiles is the one that developed this line. And again, much like the Eclipse, it just messes with the eye pigmentation, but it does something a little bit different with the pattern as well. So this happens to be a TREMPER albino marble eye. Another spectacular two-bang animal would be the TREMPER albino white and yellow. So again, a recessive mutation with the TREMPER albino and that dominant white and yellow. But man, does that animal absolutely smoke. Another really spectacular animal would happen to be this blazing blizzard. Now the blizzard is a recessive mutation that looks similar to the Murphy's patternless. So they're kind of white when they're babies, but sometimes they get a little bit dull and gray, sometimes even some brownish looks when they get older. But when you add them to any of the albinos, this happens to be a TREMPER albino, you get the blazing blizzard, and it just really cleans them up. A lot of them are pure white even as adults. This one is really neat because it has some really yellow tinges to it, which I think makes it look absolutely stunning. This happens to be a snow eclipse white and yellow. Okay, the snow we've talked about, the white and yellow we've talked about, and the eclipse is the eye pigment that we've talked about. You put those three together, and that just is one absolutely gorgeous animal. Now, I tell you what, guys, I hope that I've kind of enlightened you a little bit about leopard gecko genetics. I could spend all day and we could go through every cage. We'd be here for 10 hours, but that's the kind of overview I wanted to give you. Leopard geckos are truly amazing, and if you're thinking about keeping one as a pet, there's a lot to choose from, and they're awesome animals. And if you're thinking about breeding, whether it's just as beginning or advanced breeding in the future, they are an awesome option for you guys. And as I'm doing things, I'm always Facebook and tweeting, Instagram and Snapchat my way through things. So make sure to follow me over at SnakeBytesTV, as well as on my daily vlog channel, Brian Barczyk. All the links are in the description. Until next week, you've been watching Snake Bites.